Savings on materials, including water, can be really a significant part of the business case for sustainability initiatives, especially in the manufacturing sector. The savings associated with materials are part of the justification in this three justification framework for business cases that fits into new opportunities for savings on material expenses. So looking at the superset of sustainability benefits that might be tapped into by any sustainability project, the materials savings are part of the group of savings in the part that is associated with capturing opportunities. And although they look like they're a piece of the savings, they may be large enough that they could be a significant contributor to a positive business case for the sustainability initiative under consideration. We'll use this very simple diagram of how a company takes in materials and water and produces usable product and unfortunately some waste as well. We'll use this to illustrate the four ways that any company can approach savings on materials. The first way is don't throw them out. So if there is potential waste coming out of the company, use the materials in that waste to recycle back into its own operation the reusable materials so that you don't end up having to pay for them again. The second way is to dematerialize the products and their packaging that the company is producing. That is to say, use less material to be able to produce a quality product or an equal quality product that you were producing before, or different materials, but dematerialize. And the different materials gets into substitute materials that may be cheaper or better, and also get into taking back your product so that you can use those materials or reuse those materials again in your manufacturing process. So this is part of the cradle-to-cradle closed loop circular economy product take-back approach as well. So any of these approaches, all four of them, can allow you to end up with fewer materials being used to what you had before, or at least less expensive materials than you had before. As I said before, material costs can be very significant, especially in the manufacturing sector. So they could be making up over half of the operational costs of running that business. Security of supply is something that keeps executives of manufacturing companies awake at night. So this gets into supply chain exposures because your materials are usually coming from somewhere else. So they worry about fluctuations in the price of the materials, including the energy prices of energy that they are using in their manufacturing process, environmental catastrophes that can interfere with either the routes between the suppliers and the company or the access to the materials themselves, the fact that they're getting more scarce, costs of labor in the supply chain, geopolitical instability in the supply chain, bankruptcy in the supply chain, a whole lot of factors that can cause them a lot of concern. But these price fluctuations and scarcity factors are usually the dominant ones that people think about. So the impact of resources becoming more scarce, obviously, is they're going to become more expensive. So that's a big concern as we start to run out of the virgin materials that we have taken for granted for years, and it's harder and harder to have access to them. This is a very busy chart, but let me just zero in a little bit more on part of it so that you see what it's trying to show. It's showing a number of different materials or things that are places that are sources of materials, especially these ones in red that are becoming more and more important. Aluminum used for transportation and packaging, phosphorus, tantalum for mobile phones, and copper and silver and so on. So there is a finite supply of these, and what this chart is showing is a stock check on what's available out there. And what it's showing in this circle is the number of years before the stock of those things runs out. And then these little numbers at the end, it shows the amount of time that we've got before they run out. So this line here is 2030, this line is 2037, this line is 2050, and it's showing that the supply of some of these is becoming significantly problematic. So as we take a look at the fact that there is no infinite supply of anything on the planet, we start to get into making sure that what we use is being used well and that it is reused after the useful life of the product in which it was manufactured has ended. We take it back and hopefully capture these in a circular economy and take more advantage of them. And of course, as things become more scarce, they become more expensive and the prices fluctuate a lot, which drives companies nuts because they're hard to predict. Raw material prices are fluctuating and going in the wrong direction. Metals and mineral prices are going in the same direction. So when you have companies like IKEA and they're looking at being able to reduce their cost of supplies and materials, the business case is in many cases driven by risk management, risk avoidance, and cost prediction, and differentiating themselves as a supplier. So it's less how much they're saving than the way in which they are positioning themselves to be able to thrive in a resource-scarce future. So when we think of materials, we normally think of minerals and metals and wood and things like that, solid materials. It's time that we started to think a little bit more about a liquid material called water. This is becoming a significant issue for businesses in many jurisdictions, and let me just give you a sense of what that's all about. This is a chart that shows that water scarcity can impact business because it's so necessary for so many aspects of the way in which businesses operate. And it's becoming a much more finite resource, and it can become an obstacle to growth. So let me just give you a one-slide overview of this finite resource aspect, because we see so many lakes and rivers that we tend to think there's a pretty big supply of it. But relative to what's available, we may not have as much as we think. So if you take a look at this slide, let me just dissect it for you. This top donut over here on the left shows that most of the water in the world is in oceans. 97.5% of the water is in oceans. So it's not drinkable, it's not usable for most of the things that we would normally use water for. There's a little piece of it, 2.5% of the water in the world, which is fresh water. Unfortunately, much of it is trapped in glaciers and ice caps or in groundwater, which is okay, we can reach that. But there's a little piece of it here that we see, and that's surface and atmospheric. 0.4% of the water in the world is there. And if we explode that little slice, we end up with that visible water being in lakes, in rivers, in wetlands, in the atmosphere. So this is a very, very precious resource relative to the availability of water in other forms. In terms of how we use this water, this is a pretty dramatic graph. The orange line is just sort of the overall trend, but look at the parts of it. What we're seeing here is that most of the water in the world is used for agriculture. Some of it's used for industry, so that's the purple line. Urban water management, that's folks like you and me. Some of it is lost through dams, and population on the right shows the population of the world. As the population of the world goes up, all of this usage goes up as well. But you'll notice that the dominant use of water is in agriculture, and therefore is very, very important to us because of the food that results from that agriculture. But from an industry perspective, we need to be careful about how we use it. And here you see a graph that shows water-related risks. So this is where the company is located and the watershed that is available in that location at that site. And as water becomes more scarce, or the quality of the water starts to deteriorate, or the ecosystem health of the area is impacted by that, or the social equity issues start to raise their heads as to who has access to that water, then you start to get into physical risks, reputational risks, regulatory risks, and financial risks, which can start to show up in monetized ways as you start to monetize those risks, which is possible in the business case for sustainability, where we consider this to be a precious resource and risks associated with it, which can be avoided if we're smarter about how we use it. So as you might expect, the Companies that are very, very dependent on water, like beverage companies, are starting to put more and more effort into making sure that they are very, very careful about how they use water. Happily, that also leads to some savings, but a lot of this has to do with simply availability of water. Same for Coca-Cola, where they're improving their water efficiency as well, saving some money. But again, this is really a question of their basic business model and the need for water to be able to supply them with what they need to make their products. And then you have companies like General Motors. They're saving money as well. And a lot of this has to do with their reputation as a company that uses water. But happily, they're also saving money, significant amounts of money each year by reusing captured rainwater for manufacturing process, etc. So there are some good savings there. So you get multiple benefits, both savings as well as risk avoidance associated with the way in which you use water. This is another company also saving a significant amount of water and avoiding risks to their business model as well. So these risks start to get significant as we start to run out of water. Many companies face potential physical challenges and reputational risks because of this water issue. And it also starts to impact the location of where they're going to locate facilities. So this is becoming a business issue. And as we take a look at where in the world water risks are at their highest, those areas start to become very problematic as locations that companies might want to locate their facilities. So there are analyses being done now of where the cities are with the largest population, fastest growing, biggest economies, and ones that have high water scarcity or current drought positions. Mexico City, for example, that gets a lot of press on this. But now we're starting to see that others as well, Delhi and Tokyo, etc. And when you start to run out of water, this becomes not just a thirst issue, this becomes a social unrest issue, which starts to impact businesses in different ways as well. So these are very, very significant undercurrents that companies are becoming increasingly sensitive to. So you can see why the United Nations is putting together an International Decade for Action on Water for Life, or did, and the rationale behind how it's connecting the dots between economic growth, environmental sustainability, social issues, and so on. Very, very important. So when we take a look at reducing materials, including water, just as a quick refresher on what those 4 different ways were, we are tempted to take advantage, total advantage of the materials that we do have and not throw them out. We're trying to dematerialize and use less water, less material in everything that we do as companies. We try to substitute other things for whatever it was we were using those materials for and water for in the first place, as well as take advantage of whatever we use and recycle, reuse, reprocess, purify water, especially, and keep it in circulation within the plant and not require any new water from aquifers or local supplies in the community. And as we do that, of course, there are savings associated with saving on water and materials, and we can also avoid some risks of inaction, especially reputational risks associated with water and materials. So in summary, there are people who can help you make an estimate as to what might be possible on savings of the materials that you're using for your products, for your packaging, the water, and so on. They could be people in operations or finance and strategy or R&D. You could get some help from company experience with lean manufacturing or quality efforts to reduce materials and waste and water. Companies in other sectors taking a look at research, using guidance that are in the worksheets associated with the business case, and coming up with estimates which have a little bit more credibility than simply a swag. So what you're doing here is you're protecting your credibility, being conservative in your estimates, and making sure that you do justice to this potential area of savings, and very, very sensitive area when it comes to savings not only of materials but also of water. So I encourage you to explore these opportunities for savings on material expenses. You may be pleasantly surprised.